Hello and welcome to this introductory video on how to use Python with a micro framework called Flask in order to make powerful web applications and pages. Because this is an introductory video on Flask, we will be showing an overall picture of just some of the things Flask is capable of doing. This video makes a few assumptions. One, that you are using either a Mac, Windows, or Linux device. Two, that you are familiar with at least some HTML and CSS. Three, that you are familiar with at least an introductory level of Python. If you are new or need a refresher, I'd recommend checking out Fernando's fantastic Python videos also on this channel. Four, that you already have Python 3 installed on your computer. And five, you are using and already comfortable with an IDE of your choosing. In this video, I will be using my preferred IDE for Python, which is VS Studio Code. VS Studio Code is robust and has a large number of extensions that make programming go more smoothly. If you would like to download it for free, you can find it at codevisualstudio.com. So what is Flask? Flask is a micro framework for Python that makes it much simpler than coding completely from scratch to create web applications and pages. A micro framework is a set of pre-coded commands and methods that you can use so you don't have to build everything from scratch. It has a robust set of features that makes tedious back-end development work easier and faster. A few of these tools that we'll talk about today is URL routing, handling posts and gets, and block templating. So how about installing and being able to use Flask? While we're doing this process, I'd highly recommend that we go to Google and we search for Python Flask. And we open this page, flask.palettesprojects.com. And this is the official documentation for Flask. And if we go to installation, we can see all the steps, all the dependencies, how to create an environment, all of those things that we will need in order to use Flask. Now, if you're using Windows, it will be different slightly than if you're using Mac, and the same thing for Linux. They'll all be slightly different, but they're effectively doing the same thing. For example, here you can see that on Windows, we're going to type that in, while on Mac, we're actually going to type this in. Same kinds of steps, just slightly different wording. So let's go ahead and start. The first thing I do is I will make a folder for our server, or what's going to pretend to be our server. So we click New Folder, and we can call it anything we want. We'll call it Learning Flask. And that's all we have to do there. You can also use Terminal to do this, which is what they're doing here. They're making a directory named My Project, and they're opening it so that they're in it, and then they'll do this step, which is what we'll do next. So let's go to VS Studio Code, and we're going to open that folder, Learning Flask, and we'll see that it showed up here on the left. There's nothing in it, but we are going to start putting stuff in it by creating a Python file called app.py. The no Python interpreter is selected, and we can see that down here. That's the case. So we're going to select Python interpreter. We're going to make sure that we're using Python 3, so we'll select that. And this will change it again in just a second, but for now, we'll just follow those steps. And then in the program, in the app.py, we're going to start with the code that we're going to have no matter what if we want to use Flask. So it is from lowercase Flask, import uppercase Flask. Then we have another line, app equals capital Flask, parentheses, underscore name, underscore. And then this is the part that'll start changing depending on what we want it to do. We'll do @app.route parentheses, quotations, slash. We'll create a function, define function, and we'll call it index. And we're going to just return the word hello for now. Now, if we run this, it won't do anything. It will open the terminal for us. But there's no syntax errors, so we didn't get any errors or anything like that in the terminal. But it's not doing anything. So what we're going to do is create a virtual environment. And that's a folder that will act like a server. And that's the code that we saw earlier, the Python 3M. We're going to create a virtual environment, which is VENV stands for. And we're going to call it VENV. And if we look up here on the left, when we press enter, now we'll have a folder named VENV, and it'll have some stuff in it. We don't have to care about all that right now. We just need to know that this exists. And so now it says that we created a new virtual environment. Do we want to select it? And we're going to click yes. And now if you see in the bottom left corner, we have our 3.83 as a virtual environment named virtual environment. This is the activate the environment section, which you can do if you need to. And then we're ready to install Flask. And what we'll use is called pip, which stands for pip installs packages. So pip install Flask with a capital. We'll see it's going to run through. And then what we're going to use to run this is we're going to click on this little icon here. We're going to click run and debug. And it's going to ask us, what do we want to run it as? We're going to run it as a Flask. Launch and debug a Flask web application. When that launches. So this tends to happen, and I'm not sure why, but I found that the fix for me is just to type in and install Flask one more time. All right, so now when we run and debug, same thing, choose Flask. Now we see it says serving Flask app called app.py in a development environment. And it's running on this IP address. And notice that 127 is called a loopback because it will always loop back to your own host, or in this case, it's your computer. So only you has access to it right now. Well, everyone else can type this IP address in, but it only ever goes back to their own computer. So nobody will be able to access this besides you. We click follow link and we get the word hello. And that's exactly what we did. So we have a website. Cool. What did it do? Well, this section we can mostly ignore. The top line imports Flask so we can use it. This initializes Flask in a way that we will be using it, but we don't really need to right now understand exactly what it's doing. Down here, however, it's creating what's called a route. And when we type in an address, when we go to any web page, like maybe if you go to Google/search, right? So you have this slash words section. And we see, in this case, it's web HP. And by default, every website will have a slash. Sometimes it just disappears. But our route is just a regular slash. We can also create other routes. So what we'll do is we're going to copy and paste this. We're going to name a route named test, and we have to use different function names. So this one will just be called test, and we're going to return the words. This is a test of the Python testing system. This button right here will restart the server. we're going to see this all run through again. And when we come over here and restart the page, and we can type in /test, we get that message. This is a test of the Python testing system. We can even do subdirectories. So if we copy this one more time, test/test/test, we'll call it test3. Wow, so many tests. I'm going to relaunch this, and we will see /test. Let's see if that works. That does not work because that's not the route we put in. But with 3 tests, there are so many tests. We can also use our routes to fill in data for us. And sometimes you may have seen that on URLs that are like super long. That's because there's data in there. So let's do an example of that. We're going to do @app.route, and we'll use a string. So we're going to do /, which a route always has to start with route. Then we're going to do string because we need to tell it what kind of variable it is, and we'll name it just name. And then we're going to define the function, and we'll call it this is a name. And we're going to return. We're going to return hello. And we're going to use curly brackets to show where the name goes. Let's talk about this real quick. So whatever they type in / whatever, that's going to show up here if it's a word. And then we're going to open this function. When we're bringing things in from up here, we have to bring it into our function. So in order to do that, we just use the name of our variable, name. We put that in, name, and then we're going to use it down here. Here I used a format print. So if you start with F and quotations, and any variable within it just needs to be used with curly brackets, and then we can refresh that. And we're going to go to / and we can put any name. My name is Patrick. Hello, Patrick. Let's put in another name, Emma, or Laura. So you can see we can use that, and we can fill in all sorts of data with that. So what if it's blank? Well, then it's just /route, and it just takes us to our main route here, our index route. So we can do, this is the home page. Refresh the server, go back to just /route, and we see that that has changed. So can we do this with a number? We can do a number as well. So @app.route. So this time we'll do an int, and we'll say that's going to be called number. We're going to define a function called number, or maybe your number. Remember, we have to bring in that variable into our function, and we're going to return your number is, or was, your number was, number, and we'll refresh this, and we'll put in /any number, so 7484. Your number was 7484. Okay, so hopefully routing's starting to make sense. So anytime that we load a web page on a server, there are 2 methods that we use to retrieve information. Everything we've done so far has been the get. You see right here, get. That means that when you type in something into your URL bar, you are going to go get information from the server. You are asking for it. That is a request that you are doing. I'll show that by doing another one. Let's get the data from 4444, and that is the process that we're using. Now there's another one called post that we'll talk about a little bit later. However, when we are going to a web page, we generally expect to have an actual HTML document load so that we can do more than just this return stuff that we've done so far. In order to do that, we're going to need another part of the Flask library called render template. And for now, I'm just going to delete these. But we're going to create an index HTML page. So we can go back to our folder, and I'm going to create a new file. We're going to call it index.html, which automatically opens here. Let's start to fill it out. We can do doc type, which, remember, tells the browser what kind of document this is, what coding language it is, HTML in this case. Then we're going to put in our HTML language, which is English. Then we're going to do our header with our title, Learning Flask. And then finally we're going to put our body. And then let's say hello. Or let's do a H1, a heading 1. Welcome to my Learning Flask site. Then under it we can do a paragraph. Welcome. And now when we save this and load it, we can save index.html, go back to the index, and so far, when we load the page, it's going to look and see what the route is. It's going to open the function that is required that's under it, and then it's going to do what's under it, just like it was a regular Python program. So here we're returning this is the home page, but what we really want to do is we want to render that template, and that is so that we can see what it looks like on our browser. So we're going to use the render template index.html. We have to choose which one we're going to render. So now we're ready to relaunch, to restart. And then we're going to go to our home, which remember is just slash. We see we got an error. And so the error is that the index.html actually has to go in a specific spot. And we can see that we have it in the same folder as app.py, but really what we have to do is create a folder called templates. And that index.html has to live under templates folder. Yes, we want to move that, and then we'll restart the server. And now it should work. Welcome to my Learning Flask site. Welcome. Just to make sure that it's definitely working, I'm Learning Flask. Launch that again, reload, and there we go. Welcome, I'm Learning Flask. So let's do the same thing with the names that we made earlier. Just copied and pasted this from another document, but we're going to return a render template called name.html, and we're going to have to create a template called name.html, and same thing, doc type HTML lang equals English, header, title, Learning Flask, and then finally body And then within here, we're going to say hello name. Because earlier, if you remember earlier we had this. So if we use name and we save it, what we're going to see is that it's actually not going to work. And I'll just notice in HTML, we're going to need 2 curly brackets versus in Python where we need the 1. If we run this, /name, hello, we don't get a name. And that's because we actually need to, just like we brought in the name variable into our function, we need to bring the name of the variable that we're using inside of the HTML file as well. So what we do is comma, and then it's going to look like this. But this on the right side of the equals represents the variable that is what is called in Python in this app.py file. On the left side, this is what we're going to refer to call that variable in the HTML file. And now when we save this, it should work. And there we go. All those options are working for us now. And we can do stuff like change the heading, change the color, we make it light blue. Until we can really start to create dynamic websites that will do calculations, get information, and post it. And when we look at the view source, we don't see the variable name. We see only the stuff that the server decided to give us, the final information. So, hello, Alfred. Hopefully at this point, you're starting to see how helpful Flask and other similar frameworks can be in creating dynamic web pages and applications. All right, let's create one more page in which we will use a form to receive data and do something with that data. For simplicity's sake, we will actually be using or creating 2 routes. One route will let us enter a word into a form, and the other will show the result of that output. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do app.route /getWord. We're going to define a function called getWord. We're going to return a rendered template called getWord.html. And we'll do the same thing down here, but with showWord. App.route showWord. Define a function, showWord, return render showWord.html. Okay, so now we can make both of those. We're going to go to templates and do getWord.html. We'll do showWord.html. In showWord, we're just going to say this would be the results. Save it, get word. This is where we'll put in the word. Now we're going to run it through the run and debug menu. Make sure you have app.py selected. Flask. When it runs down here, assuming everything's okay, we're going to click on follow link. / and then we have get word. And we have show word. All right, so that all seemed to work okay. We just don't really have it doing anything yet. Let's go ahead and fill in get word and show word. Doc type, HTML language equals English. And we have our header. We have our body. And we're just going to copy and paste this into get word. And let's work on get word. So what do we need to be able to get input? So that's a form. And we need two types of inputs, or two types of inputs. So input type equals text, which is a text box. Input type equals submit button. Now when we save this and we run this, and we start the server, get word, we're going to have a place to type and a submit button. And all it's going to do right now is go back to this page, and this will empty out like so. Notice there's a question mark on here now, so it did run and do something. All right, so we want it to go to the show word page, so we're going to do action equals / show word. And now when we run this and we refresh this page and we say hello, it's going to go to show word, which has nothing in it, but we know that it's working. We'll put something in it just to see. There we go. But obviously we want to get the input and do something with it. So what we're going to do there, we have to give the text box a name so that we know when we're looking at the form which part of the form we're going to get the information from. So name equals word, because that's where we're going to put the word. And something interesting starts to begin to happen when we have a name in an input box. So let's go back to our get word, refresh, look at the URL bar. Now that starts to show up here, and this is part of the get method of getting information on a server. Post will actually hide all of this stuff, but get still shows it up here. And we can see that down here as well, that we have a get process and that URL is showing up down here. We can also give it a placeholder. If you wanted to take the time, we could do CSS and all of that fun stuff. But this is all we need to be able to retrieve the information from this page. Now we're going to go back to app.py, and we're going to start to request that information. And once we get that information, we have to save it in a variable. So we're going to say word results equals request. Now the rest of this, each step, once you understand what it does, makes sense, but it's a little confusing at first. So we're going to do args.get parentheses, quotations, and the name of that form name, like the section of the form with the text box, and we gave it the name word. We're going to put in here. So what it's doing, and we also have to make sure that we have request up here in our parts of Flask that we're using. So request will ask the server for information. We're asking for an argument, and we're going to get that from this part of the form. Right, and remember that's showing up here. It says word equals So that equals that, and that will eventually equal the result. And remember, in order to use it in a page, we have to do the same thing here. So, comma, we'll just say word equals word results. We'll save that. Let's just run it. Let's do a print and make sure everything is working the way we expect it to. No errors. And then as long as word result gets to this point, it will print down here in the terminal. So we're going to go back. We're going to refresh. Enter your words here. Howdy. Show the word here. We saw that show up there. And it is down here. So we are clear. We've done that chain of things to get the word to where we need it to be. And when we go to show word, we can say each one, your word was, remember there's two of these in a HTML document, and that was just word. We'll save that, refresh, and go back and refresh the page, reload the page, and then we'll start saying some words like pizza. Your word was pizza, and I guess I have an extra bracket there. Chicken. All right, so let's talk about what happened there. We created our two apps, or app routes, I mean. So we get /get word, and we have a show word page, and we've created functions for them. Within the get word, when you go to our website /get word, you're rendered the template for getting word, which is a form that has a input for a text and an input for a button. We named the text box into what is called word. And we see that in our URL now, we have word equals hello. That comes down here. We request to get that from word, whatever word was equal to. This is now, word result is now equal to word. We can delete this because we know that it is working. And then it returns a rendered template of showword.html. And we've taken this, we've saved it as a variable that will be used in the HTML file called word, and it can be any word that we want it to. So we can say result equals, and then in show word, we just use that same word. So your word was result. Refresh that. Your word was hippo. Right. This is how we're starting to generate information. That's from the user, but we could have generated it on our own using Python, plugged it into our HTML files, and we're starting to get very dynamic information that, once again, is just given to our browser specifically once it's calculated, without the browser ever doing anything different. So your word was hippo. So what if we didn't want it to show up in the URL? What if it was like a password or something like that? Well, then we have to use the post method, and we're going to have to tell it specifically that we're going to use that. So method equals post, and notice in the HTML file there aren't commas, so no commas here. And then we're going to tell it here that we're going to use one of the methods. So we're going to use a comma, and this one is actually going to be methods equals, and we're going to give it a list. And in this list, we're only going to put post. You can use both get and post, or one or the other. It does, you can do both. So we're going to do that. But what's going to change here, if we run this right now, we're not going to get a result. We're going to get an error here. That's because the args format only works under get. Remember get down here? So we're going to use what's called form. A little confusing, but form is what works for post. We're going to run that. And it's going to run just as normal, assuming we put everything in correctly. But we're not going to see it in the URL bar and the route. So let's go back to get word, enter word. So we're going to do ostrich. And notice it no longer shows up here, but it still works pretty much in the same way. So let's add to that show word. What I want to do is create a way to make the word randomized. So we're going to import on the top here, import random, and we're going to use this word result for some other stuff. So let's take word result, and we're going to turn it into a list so we can randomize the list. So we're going to do a character list, or CHARLST equals list of word results. And then from there, we can randomize it or shuffle the list, or shuffle, random.shuffle. And what are we shuffling? We're shuffling charlist. And then we need to turn charlist back into a word. And we're going to use that, we're going to use what's called the join method to do that. So new word is equal to join, and what are we adjusting? Charlist. And then down here, we're actually going to return the new word. Now, assuming I typed in everything correctly, lowercase r, run and debug, add the Flask. Everything seems to be working. Refresh this page. Shita, your word was randomized. And we can even make that lowercase, so we can take this dot lower, run that one more time. Zebra. Right. I think that just happened to have spelt it correctly. Zebar. Rezba. Breeza. Okay, so hopefully you can see how we can start doing stuff with all of this data that we're given. One more thing before we end this video that I want to show you guys. So let's take a quick look back at, we have 4 HTML files, and they all are very, very similar to each other because they all have the stock type HTML. They all have HTML. They still have headers and titles, same title even, body, all this stuff. The only part that is different when I just take all this away is this section in the body. One of the things that Flask lets us do is called block templating. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new template. We're going to call that layout.html, and it can be any name that you want. Layout.html tends to be the norm. So that's what we'll use here, and we're going to type in everything that is the same between all of our pages. And so that's HTML and lang equals English, and then we're going to do a header, title, learning Flask, and do body. And so it's the stuff in the body that has changed. And so what is new that we're going to add is one curly bracket and a number sign on both sides. And inside of it, we can type in some code. So in this case, what we're going to use is we're going to call a block, and then you can use any word you want, but usually for this, we'd call body. And then we're going to do the same format. This is a language called Jinja. And is pretty much Python, but that you can use in HTML documents. So the Jinja convention always starts with curly brackets and a number sign, because those two things together aren't used very much in any other language. And so we do block body, and on the other one we do end block as a one word. All right, so we'll save that. Now let's start with index. And remember, the only thing that's different are these two lines right here. We're going to start the code with same kind of format. We're going to do block body here, and in the block one word like this. We'll save, we'll restart the server, and we can see that worked just fine. We'll do the same thing here. And the same thing here. We have this that we can change if we need to change everything at once. So for example, maybe we have, go back to the index page, and we save this to any page that you want to use a template. You're going to refer to the template using extends, and then the section of the code, you will have block. So this is in a body, but you could do block. So you could do block title, you could do block style, you can do all sorts of custom-made things, but in this case we're going to use block body. Then we can see that this changed even the first one. So let's delete that. And we'll see that it's going to go away. Cool. So in this video, we've seen how to create routes, how to use part of the route name to get variables that you can use for things. We've seen how to use forms to get information and then do something with it. We've shown the get method, which remember shows the names and their values in the URL bar. But we've also used post in order to negate that. And then last, but definitely not least, we created our own template that we can use, and then we referred back to it so we could have shorter code snippets on all of our HTML pages. In the next video, we will be looking at creating an app, putting all the stuff together to create random generators, such as a coin toss, a random number generator. We'll add back our shuffle for the words, and we'll also create a choose where you want to eat page. So stay tuned for that.